Today we'll be crocheting a Minecraft bee, so what we'll need is a 4mm hook, a 2mm hook, a pair of scissors, some gold yarn, some brown yarn, some black yarn, some white yarn, and a bit of blue yarn. To start off, we're going to be making the front part, which is where we'll put the face on. So what we'll need for this part is our 4mm hook and our gold yarn. We're going to start with a magic circle, so we'll wrap around the fingers twice, go through, and we're going to make 8 single crochets in this magic circle. Now that we have our 8 single crochets, we are going to close this circle and put a knot in it. I usually knot mine at least 2 times to make sure that knot is big enough to where it won't be loose at all in the front. The last thing we want is a big hole in the front of our bee. In our second round, we're going to be creating the corners. So we'll be doing a single crochet and then a triple increase, which is 3 single crochets into 1 stitch. And we'll just repeat that 4 times for 4 corners. I put a little diagram in the top corner to show how these rounds are going to be structured. As you can see, the triple increases account for that corner and the 2 on the sides. That way it increases as it goes. As we start round 3, you should notice that the stitches in between the corners are increasing by 2. Before, it was just 1 single crochet. In this round, it's 3. But since we're starting between 2 corner stitches, those 3 are going to be split up. This is to make sure that we're ending the round right in the middle of those 2 corner stitches. I think this is the best way to hide where our square ends and begins. Round 4 is going to be the same thing, but instead of 3, we're going to be putting 5 single crochets in between the corners. However, we are going to end this round a little differently by adding a stitch on the end. This is to make sure our round ends more in the middle and not on the side. Alright, now that that's done, we are going to do a slip stitch in the next stitch, and going back into that same stitch in the back loop only, we are going to do a single crochet, and we will repeat this for the whole entire round, just going in the back loops and doing single crochets in them. This will take the front of the bee and transition it to the body of the bee. This round we're just going to go right into the next stitch, and we're going to single crochet all the way around in both loops. I don't like to slip stitch and chain and then go around. I like to just go continuously around and around because it minimizes the starting and stopping points. The next round we're going to be doing the exact same thing as before, just single crocheting all the way around. This way we have 3 rounds of gold on the body. Alright, now that that's done, we are going to take a break on the body to do the eyes. You can do the eyes after you finish the bee and stuff it, but this way you have more range on what you can do because you can flip it to the front and the back. So we'll get our black and blue out, and we're going to cut out a long piece of black because we're going to be using black the most. Now get a long piece of blue. It doesn't have to be as long as the black because we're not using as much, but you still need enough to work with. Alright, now when making the eyes, it's a little bit tricky. We need to pick 6 stitches that are 2 across and 3 high. So I'm going to go through and kind of outline it where I want to start the black. Alright, I'm going to take the black yarn and I'm going to thread it through those 2 stitches, and then I'll tie a knot and I'll pull that knot back behind the V where we can't see it. I'll put a little diagram up in the top corner of how I thread the yarn to create these eyes. I kind of do it in X's, and then I just keep going over those X's until it covers up most of the stitches, and then I will go around the outlines and fill it in, and that should cover all of the gold up. As you can see, I like making them in 3 sections, and before I move on to the next section, I like doing the outline. So we're going to do the outline for this big section before we move on to that top corner piece. Now that the black's done, we are going to do the blue, and it's just that one little corner that we left empty, so it shouldn't be too hard, but we're going to start it the same way we did with the black, and we are going to tie a knot and hide that knot before we start doing our little X's and then our outline. Moving on to our next eye, we are going to be doing the same thing as before, but this time we are inverting it. So where the blue was on the right side, it's now going to be on the left side. But we're going to try to line our black up as evenly across as we can. That way one eye doesn't look slightly higher than the other. Now that the eyes are done, we are going to move on to the body. When continuing the body, we are going to start giving it stripes. So I like to give them 4 stripes before completely going to brown. When changing colors, I am going to pull apart our last stitch, and then I'll stick the hook through those 2 loops, and instead of pulling through our gold yarn, we're going to be pulling through our brown yarn. Now we're going to do a slip stitch, but before that we need to take our short brown piece and our gold yarn, and we need to make sure they're secure in our slip stitch. Now we will chain 1, and then going back into that same stitch we're going to do a single crochet and then do a single crochet all the way around. We want to pull our gold piece away, that way we don't work it into our stitches, but we do want to keep that short brown piece in our stitches to kind of hide it and keep it more secure so it doesn't come loose. Just like last time, the way we're going to change colors is by partially doing that last stitch, and instead of pulling through the brown, we're going to pull through the gold this time. Then we'll do a slip stitch in the next stitch, chain 1, and start doing single crochets by going into that same stitch and then all the way around. Once again, we will change colors and then go all the way around. We'll do this a few more times, that way we have 4 stripes before going on to our brown, and then once we get to brown we'll just go continuously around and we don't do slip stitches and chains. I do want to note on this round we will be cutting our gold yarn and working it into our stitches to make the tail more secure and also hide it, because this is the last time we will be needing the gold. Like I mentioned earlier, we're not going to be doing any more slip stitches for the remainder of this body part, so we're just going to go right on and steamroll ahead into the next round. As we finish up the body part, we are going to be transitioning into doing the back part, which is basically a reverse of the front part. So we'll slip stitch into that next stitch, and then working into the back loops only, we are going to do 2 single crochets, and then a triple decrease, which is the opposite of a triple increase, where we take 3 loops of the next 3 stitches and we decrease them all at the same time. I provided another little diagram up in the top corner to hopefully help demonstrate this. I want to add that due to differences in tension and yarn type, you may need to move over your triple decrease a stitch just to make sure it lines up with your triple increase in the front of the bee. You want your corners to line up, otherwise it's going to look wonky. To do this, all you have to do is add or decrease the amount of single crochets you do before you do your triple increase. So if you do 2 before you do your triple decrease, you need to do 3 stitches at the end of the round. If you do 3 before your triple decrease, you need to do 2. You just want to make sure that you have 5 single crochets in between each triple decrease. As we start this next round, we're going to be doing the same thing as before, but we're just decreasing the amount of stitches in between our triple decreases. It's very similar to the front, just backwards. Also, if you did have to adjust the amount of stitches in the last round to make your corners match up, that you still account for that in this round as well. Alright, for our final round, we are going to be doing the same thing, but we are decreasing the amount of stitches between our triple decreases to 1. Also, at the end of the round, instead of doing a single crochet, we're going to do a slip stitch to cut off our round. That way we can cut the yarn and pull it through and start closing up the bee. When cutting, we want to leave a pretty long tail, that way we can weave it through the stitches to close up that hole, but before we do that, we're going to stuff the bee. I have pretty small fingers, so the hole works pretty well for me, but if you need a bigger hole, you can always just take out the last round that you did, stuff the bee, and then do that final round one more time. When stuffing the bee, you need to remember not to stuff it completely firm. We need a little bit of room left in there, that way we can line the corners with stuffing, because that's how we're going to shape it and make it square. If you don't do this and you just stuff it until it's firm, then the bee is going to be very round, which is very un-Minecraft-like of it. The way I line the corners is by guiding the stuffing with my finger all the way to the front and working my way to the back. It will make your bee look a little weird at first, but I promise once we do all 4 corners and we squish it a little bit, it will look perfectly square. I am just squishing it in between of those corners, that way I don't squish my corners and make the bee look like a circle again. But yeah, you can just squish it and maneuver that stuffing inside until it's nice and square. Once you're done with that, you're going to top it off a little bit and make sure it's nice and firm, because if you leave room in there, then your stuffing over time is going to kind of collect in the middle, and then your bee's going to end up being a circle. So you want to make sure you stuff it firmly. Now we're going to take our hook and we are going to weave the tail through the stitches to close the hole. You want to start 2 stitches ahead, go in and then out, and then pull the tail through. Now we just pull really tight and then tie a few knots to keep it in place. You want to make sure that there's no slack when doing this. We don't want a hole popping up. So make sure it's nice and tight. Then I just use my scissors to tuck that knot back inside the bee and then tuck the tail in as well. Now the main part of our bee is done. All that's left now is to do the feet, the antenna, and the wings, which won't take long at all. Alright, we're going to start with the feet. So we need to take our brown yarn and start with a slip knot. Then we will chain 3, and in the second chain from the hook we are going to do a single crochet, and then do another single crochet in that last chain. Now we'll chain 1 and cut the yarn, leaving a little bit of a tail to tie it with. Now we just need to make 5 more for 6 legs. Again, to make one of the feet, we just start with a slip knot, then we'll chain 3, do a single crochet in the second chain from the hook, do a single crochet in the last chain, then we'll chain 1, then cut the yarn. To sew the feet on, we are going to work around those brown stripes and just kind of place them apart from each other so it looks more natural. I provided a little diagram up in the top to kind of demonstrate what I'm saying. All we do is pull one thread through, and then we'll tie a knot twice, and then we'll take our scissors and we'll stuff that back into the bee. I also want to say that this is the reason I prefer using hooks over sewing needles. You don't have to use as much yarn with a hook. You can use short pieces as long as you have enough to tie knots with. It's fine. Plus a hook is more familiar. You're used to crocheting with it, so putting it through the stitches and pulling yarn through is a lot more familiar and easy to me than using a sewing needle. Since you tied your knots pretty tight, you can kind of yank and pull on the legs a little bit to adjust them. Now your bee has legs. It can stand on its own. Aren't you proud of it? Now we're going to be working on the wings. It's very similar to the legs, but this time we're going to chain 6 instead of 3. Then we're going to turn it over, and in the second chain from the hook, we're going to be doing a single crochet, and we're going to be doing a single crochet in every chain down the line. However, in the last chain, we're going to be doing 2 single crochets in it. This is to account for turning. And when we turn, we're just going to work back into that original chain. Now what you should be doing is working into one loop of the chain each time you do a single crochet. So a chain has 3 loops, and you're basically taking 2 of those loops for each side of your wing. And as we did for the other side, when we get to the last chain on this side, we're going to be doing 2 single crochets. Alright, we have to do one more side of the wing, so just go right into your single crochets that you did before. And just like before, when we get to the end of the line, we're going to do 2 single crochets instead of 1. Then to close it off, we're going to do a slip stitch in the next stitch, and then cut a nice long piece for us to sew with. Now we just have to make one more wing. Sewing the wings on is going to be the most complicated sewing when it comes to the bee. I'm going to put a little diagram up in the corner to help out with the placement of the stitches. You kind of want to work in a tiny little square, starting by pulling that yarn through our slip stitch, and then going back a stitch in the wing and pulling it through again. After that, we're going to work across. So we're going to go to the other side of the wing. If you remember when we were making the wing, we left one loop of that chain left. So you can kind of think of that as the spine of the wing. So we're going to be working and securing this wing around the spine. Now we're just going to tie a few knots to secure it, and we're going to stuff that back inside the bee to hide it. It may be hard to tell what stitches you're supposed to go into, so I recommend just holding the bee up face to face with you and kind of seeing if the wings are aligned. They may be off to one side more than the other, and if that's the case, you're going to have to adjust the wings, that way they look even. Like we did for the legs, I like to pull and yank at the wings very gently to stretch them out and shape them. But now your bee has wings and it can fly, figuratively. I decided to save the easiest part for last, the antenna. To start out, we're going to do a slip knot, and then we're going to chain 3, and then we're going to cut and leave a nice long tail. That is all you gotta do. And we're going to make one more of those. Now you're going to take your smaller hook and you're going to weave that long tail all the way through the chains until you get it down to where your other tail is. When you're doing this, be sure not to pull too tight. You want your antenna to be nice and straight, not scrunched up into a little ball. Once it's down there, you want to tie a knot to secure it, but again, do not pull too tight. It is very easy to pull tight in this situation, so you kind of want to hold down on those chains, that way it cannot scrunch up on you. Now it's time to sew the antenna on. Once again, I'm going to provide a little diagram up in the top to help out. You basically want it to be in the corner where the blue part of your eye stops. It's very similar to how we sewed on the legs by just pulling one strand through and then tying a few knots and then stuffing it back in. The bee is completely done now. You can squish on it a little bit, pull on the antenna and wings, and make sure everything looks how you want it to look. But other than that, there's nothing to add, nothing left to do. You have a little Minecraft bee. As you can see, it comes out to around the size of my palm. And I think that's a lovely little size for our Minecraft bee to be. Thoughts and opinions, questions and concerns, leave them down in the comments and I will address them as best as I can. Hopefully I explained everything well. I know I'm not the best, especially when it comes to explaining the sewing parts, but hopefully you have a little Minecraft bee of your own now.